Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar on a very important topic on environmental justice. And this is a topic where we can do good, helping communities, and we can also progress with our business activities. Presentation today will be on how to effectively conduct environmental justice. What is environmental justice, and what it needs to be done to successfully accomplish environmental justice. So I will start the presentation. I will turn off the camera. So here's the content of the presentation. Let me present who is the host. My name is Jesse T. My colleague and partner, Michael Johnson, will be presenting. I'll present the introduction and the slides. Mr. Johnson will present the live demo, so you will see it working on a real case. So the introductions explain environmental justice, then the benefits of a solution to do this, because I need to let you know that we have brought this solution in the past to many places where they have attempted to put it all together, contract to put it all together, and it didn't succeed. And when it succeeds, it's a bunch of Python codes and Excel spreadsheets, and it's all very messy, very difficult to maintain. So what is environmental justice? EJ for short. According to the US EPA, it is the fair treatment and involvement of all people regardless of race, color, origin, or income with respect to implementation and enforcement of environmental laws. This is what the text say, but what really is environmental justice? It is an idea that there are disadvantaged communities being exposed to more pollutants than the average population. And how we address this? Well, we have to compute the impact on the whole population and see the disadvantaged population and see if there are differences. They want it to be equitable. To do that, we must know what all the pollutants are causing in that community. And because we have so many chemicals and many ways where these chemicals travel and are transported to people, we must account for this using risk, human health risk. Cancer and non-cancer risk, population will be exposed. Okay, there is a federal presidential executive order 14,008 to address environmental justice, and it also provides funding for environmental justice on the order of $2.5 billion. We will see on the next slide, and we will see more details on how to compute and what needs to be done to successfully identify inconsistencies in the distribution of pollutants. So the White House also created two councils, Environmental Justice Interagency Council and an Advisory Council. So this is really taking foot, especially with the funding already being provided to local and state agencies, to tribes, which are already issuing RFPs. The money is being allocated. It's on the order of $2.5 billion. I mentioned that. And we need to identify where these opportunities to execute business and also help those in need. And we are going to present this throughout the presentation, and that's what we are here for. So there are environmental justice screening tools, and for state and local. These are great tools because they can identify communities that are maybe exposed. So they have value, they're nice looking ones, you can see them. So the positive, we already said, they identify potential environmental justice communities. However, they do not identify the contributing sources. Is it coming from the roads? Is it coming from airports, ports, industrial facilities, waste, be it effluents or be it solid waste like garbage? They do not identify. And we need to identify the community and trace back to the source, and also identify the chemicals, each one of them. So it's not a matter of just saying they're being exposed. How do we fix this? So we must identify actionable processes to rectify situations. So I can trace back to sources, can identify if it is like VOCs or if it is particulate, what is happening here. So we need to know that, or else identifying and doing nothing does not solve the problem. This is a complex thing to do. We will see how it is addressed. So see the tool that can do all this. This tool have been in use since 2003 and being updated and evolved. It's a web-based tool. This is a dashboard for monitoring only, but there are many other dashboards that we present here that allows people to have quick information. So I know cases that was reported to me that a head of an agency on a state went to talk with the governor. Governor asks questions. It takes a month to go back and collate the response. It's no longer acceptable. So the agency can go with a tablet or a phone or a laptop and immediately provide the answer with a solution like this. This is not just for agencies, this is for companies and also consultants. I must remind you that Lake's environmental software is not an environmental consulting company. We provide the IT solution, we implement, we can do a lot of the work, but we are not a consulting company for the environment. So we team up with companies that conduct a lot of this work here behind the scene to provide the data. Now, the solution, very important to understand that integration is a must when you're doing environmental justice, because we need to be able not to just say there is a problem, we need to know where it's coming from. And we do that with emissions inventory. We have tools to compute over 11,000 different processes that emits to the atmosphere. We then, once this is done, we can press a button and it will automatically conduct air dispersion modeling. An example is the state of Minnesota. We process 200,000 sources, all the sources on the state, simultaneously. And then we, just by pressing a button from the emissions inventory, this is done and we can do more work. So we can get the ambient monitor stations, AQMIS, and see the values with the dispersion modeling. And then we can go from the monitor to the emissions inventory. And we have found often factors of 1,000, and it's easy to see people confuse kilograms with grams and vice versa, and they enter it wrong in the emissions inventory. We can fix that by integrating. I remind you to say that it may be company or consulting company or industrial company, can be a regulatory agency, it is usually the monitoring and the emissions, they are not integrated. They talk to each other to say hello, but not to exchange data. And this, everything is integrated. So we can do more. Let me stretch the slide. We can conduct human health risk assessment. We can conduct ecological as well, but it's not the point here. We're focusing on environmental justice, and we do human health risk assessment, identify if there is inequality on the distribution, and then we can trace back to sources where then you can invest the first dollar to have the maximum reduction, initial reduction on the impacts on the health risks. We can then, with this, conduct real environmental justice, not just guessing or saying it's higher or lower, and so what. It is a combination of all the chemicals, how the chemicals get to the individual. For you to have an idea, dioxin and furans are 1,000 times worse as a health impact through indirect pathways than through direct inhalation. So if somebody comes with a measurement and tells you, well, it is dioxin and furans, all I need is inhalation, that's not true. Besides, monitors will not really monitor 1,200 or more chemicals. They are hazardous to the health. And this system will. So then we can implement the reports. Now, what are the benefits for agencies? Conduct effective environmental justice. Follow up with a system like this. For consultants, we have consultants that in system they are 15 years in use, and the consultants become the preferred expert, and all they have to do is just sign new hours for the next year, and they keep coming, and they have become preferred consultants for the client. Facilities substantially reduce costs and reduce red tape because we optimize everything. So sample projects, US EPA from Houston to Lake Charles, that is 100 miles, 160 kilometers of the densest concentration of oil and gas industry, petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, and other type of industries in the world. 160 kilometers. We computed emissions from everything. And for the US EPA, we did the entire state of New Jersey, environmental justice specific. Minnesota, as I mentioned, Kuwait, there are other examples. One thing that I would like to show is that with the monitor alone, I cannot segregate the sources. So this is just an example that we could then tell Minnesota that this is the risk caused by point sources, sources from industries. And this is the risk from traffic, on-road mobile sources. So this caused Minnesota to talk EPA, and things have been changing for a few years at EPA, addressing a lot of these road risks, area sources, etc. So we give the potential then, the ability to solve and segregate sources. We also indicate where the communities, considering these to be communities, which ones are the most impacted, and this clearly there is a environmental justice aspect for this community here. So we can immediately have dashboards indicating this continuously, can have multi-users accessing this through different devices and seeing impacts and responding and taking action. Many other types of dashboards on roads, greenhouse gases, which is not the case here, but it's just to alert that we will have another webinar where we will talk about the new approaches also federally in the United States, with funding for greenhouse gases. Emissions calculations. As I said, we have calculations for over 11,000 different processes that emit to the atmosphere. And because we did work for the US EPA, these calculation methods are validated. So remember, people do emissions inventory with Excel spreadsheets. First, easy to commit errors, easy to then mess up the calculations, and very difficult to validate. These are absolutely all validated. I believe to be the only ones that the US EPA validated. So you are certain to get it. We also do the dispersion modeling, use various models. There are many things we can do here. And we do all these models. And if we need item 5 here, from 8 are for ozone, with the exception of 6 here. This is, these are photochemical models, but the best one if you have ozone would be skip off with chemistry. It has the full chemistry from CMAC embedded here, and it allows us then to trace back precisely sources that are contributing the most for ozone. Mostly used AirMod because it's nearby, can also be used ScalPath. Ambient monitor stations are very valuable. Unfortunately, this graph here is what people get out of it. We can get way more value, even better values out of it. This is an example. Even if your monitor station does not have the wind information, we can plot wind information on your monitor station, and it gives, this is not wind rows, this is pollution rows. So in this case, I like to show because there was a refinery here and they were under heavy duty supervision by a regulatory agency. And the problems, even without doing a dispersion model, was coming from here. There was a petrochemical plant here that was actually the culprit. So can also use monitor stations with artificial intelligence and forecast what's happening. So we have the whole United States, for example. If we wait to do photochemical models for every single community in the United States, it will take decades to complete, to implement and start running. With AI, we can do it in a matter of days. And then we can forecast ozone and predict and see the impacts in the population. So the orange one is 24 hours ahead prediction, you can see here. And the blue ones are the measure when it happens. See how good we're getting this? So we can do AQIs, and you see the community right here. Use extensive mapping in this application, and we use the official EPA colors. There can be different ones, different levels. And we can forecast and then say what it will be also AQI in the next hours to 24 hours. We can prioritize what sources should be addressed first. And this example here uses approaches in California. So analysis of environmental justice with short-term acute health effects, long-term cancer and long-term non-cancer, multi-pathway, multi-sources with precise tracing back. We can also forecast impacts using numerical models, using WRF, using path models like SkipPath and CalPath, and forecast. This is an example in Qatar. They will have the World Cup at the end of this year, World Cup for soccer. And we did the entire country, and this is forecasting this tank farm. So we use extensive GIS and mapping because it's very important to allocate where to look and generate the reports. And this is a quick overview. I'll pass now to my colleague and partner, Mr. Michael Johnson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. That was an incredible introduction to the subject of environmental justice. I want to start the demo by starting with some of the basics that are needed to complete environmental justice studies and form the basis for what is needed in terms of starting to make the analysis. So we will start here with kind of a summary of the emissions inventory that is built up in the system. You'll note that in the application, you can get a listing of all facilities in your study area. You can see the pollutants that are listed. So the ones that I were interested in were ammonia, CO2, CO, NOx, PM10, SO2, VOC, etc. You'll note that we have the totals for each of the for the entire study area. We also have the individual contributions from each facility. To the right of it, you'll see that there is a nice map. It shows the locations of these facilities that are in our study area. This is important so that we can make sure that positionally, if we are having an impact on a particular community, we can successfully attribute those impacts to those facilities. So if they are not in the right place, we are not necessarily capturing who is impacting whom appropriately, and this may lead to an inappropriate level of burden or an underreporting of that. So we like to make sure that you can visually see the facilities where they're located. Scroll down a little bit further, you'll note that with also this tabular data, we also present graphs. So you can see highlights for the individual pollutants that are represented in the tab above. Just scroll up a little. And you can then highlight not only by scale, but you can also highlight the individual values to get a precise value number. So sometimes we realize this is 1.4 tons, but here we can highlight and find out that it's 1.49. Again, we can do this for each of the pollutants of interest. So for example, this is what our CO2 numbers look like. And we can scroll down, we can see what our CO and our NOx values. If we need, we can click on this hamburger menu and we can export them to PNG and JPEG. This is just so that it makes it easy for us to incorporate the imagery into a report or into a discussion as we're sharing it with stakeholders. If we look at another part of the system, we can look at the monitoring. We'll note that the monitoring can be hooked up in real time, or it can be used with historic data logged data, so that if you have a station where you capture the values and you do gap filling and other things before you want to start the analysis, you can do so and then import it into the system. You'll note that we have the time series, and we'll see the individual values as we drag the cursor along the time series, and we can see the values as they are measured. You'll note across the top we have this dash line, which represents the regulatory limits for NO2, and this just allows us to identify if we're having any breaches or if we had areas of concerns or periods of concern. Next to it, we can see ozone, and again, just to repeat, we can see highlights of the values and the trends. We can see here where we had a break in this particular station, so we can go from here to here, but we can see that this other station 2 was continuously online, so it helps being able to visualize the reliability of our data. A little further down is, again, as Dr. Jesse pointed out, we have the windrows, and again, we are able to highlight and identify where sources of wind are coming from. And we can see that a lot of the predominant wind is driven in the northwest sector. If we switch to a pollutant rows, for example, we can see that for NO2, we can see that again, most of our NO2 concentrations are coming from the northwest. And for the people in this community here in Station 1 and in Station 2, we can see the folks are coming again from the northwest. And so if we need to look at any kind of curtailment or abatement to help improve the community health, we would be looking at facilities here in the northwest sector. Again, another area of concern is that we may want to look at different stations. So we can identify the station. If we zoom out on the map, we can see the communities and where they're located. So we can see what communities are being protected by this, and so we can identify where the station is, and we can see the denseness of the population that it's meant to cover. So we can see here that everything is good, and that the AQI calculations are recommending that everyone can just go about their business in their everyday. Now, if we look at this first station, we can see, however, that it in this much more densely populated area here on this satellite photo that we're having exceedingly high concentrations of CL. And this shows the values of what the folks in this region who are tied to or being protected by this monitor, and the environmental justice says what to do. So in this case, they suggest sheltering in place and curtailing your outside activities until these high levels of concentration pass. If we want to look at the risks so we can understand what kind of exposure and what the types of health effects are done, we have the prioritization as a baseline, so we can run prioritization runs, we can adjust the toxicity tables, so we can, as the science evolves, we are able to update the health effects from the different compounds that are being emitted in our area, and we can see how they're being impacted. We want to look at particular more involved multi-pathway risk. We have both a standard kind of model and we have a population risk model that allows us to, when coupled with census data, understand the types of community and the types of demographic data and who is impacted by this. So we can identify people with lower incomes or certain ethnicities. Are they being burdened in a way that is not appropriate, or how we can start the abatement for those activities. Just I wanted to show, before we move on to some of the other aspects, is that all of the pollutants are available. They show you what the toxicity values are, and they can be updated as needed as the science goes along. Now let's talk a little bit about the modeling. Again, we have a complete modeling suite, so we are able not only to have the magnitude and intensities of the emissions, but we can see how they're impacting the community. So we can see from these particular sources of benzene here, these high points that are emitting benzene, we can see the spread and how much of this particular carcinogenic agent is impacting the populations in surrounding the areas. So we can see, for example, toluene, what those emissions look like at a quick glance. So we can see, oh boy, this is substantial. We can see xylenes if we wanted to, so we can see how those are impacted, and we can see the level of detail here. Furthermore, as we understand, if we do need to do abatement, we can see the contributors. And so once we look at a particular plot, we can see that the source number 44 is driving the offsite consequences. And so the high points are coming strictly from this source. But if we were interested, we could see the percentages if there was a multitude of sources for attribution. If we look at benzene, of course, we can see now that instead of source 44, we have a much higher source, a completely different source for that exposure. Now, if we go to the project map, we can do an even more detailed analysis than we did before. So we can see not only the contours, we can see facilities, we can see the individual sources. So if I want, I can highlight, and it will tell me about the contour, the release points, and who was in this area that may be causing some of these high levels of exposure. And so we can see the types of sources, the release points, and the facilities. Now, furthermore to this, if we wanted to integrate, for example, our census data, we can turn that on, and we can note that over top of the census data, we can see the contours. So now that we have these high points, we can select and we can see the demographic data. So we can see what types of communities, what are the demographics in terms of ethnicity, income. We can see exactly what is happening, and so we can look again at different points, and we can highlight and see, for example, in this other high region, we can see the impacts that we would see. Other things is that we can see the magnitudes on the color ramps, and then we can place and do the types of analyses. So then once we're ready to do an environmental justice study and we want to get into a more detailed, we have a much better idea of the areas and the communities that we need to focus on for high impacts, say from benzene or other carcinogenic compounds, for example. And lastly, I'd like to just follow up with showing some of the reports that are available. Now, these are not all of the reports that are potentially available in the system, because there are many reports that are unique or custom to everybody's AIR program or the program that they report into. But I do want to show that when we, for example, run the pollutant totals report, it allows us to get at a glance all of the pollutants that are in our inventory. I can highlight all of them, For example, if I want a detailed super report, I'll click next. I can choose the period from which our inventory is based on, which is annual, and I can go ahead and run the report. And it loads up within a couple of seconds, and we can see the pollutant total emissions in tons for, say, ammonia or the other compounds. And lastly, but not leastly, I just want to also highlight that all the reports that you see on the page can be exported to PDF, Microsoft Excel, or Word, so that if you need to refine the report that you have gathered into a summary or an executive level statement, you can do so and post-process it within these other fine applications before you hand it off, so you are not limited to just what you see on the page or just the reports that you have. So there is flexibility to add graphs and charts to augment and add value to the data. And with that, I will hand the presentation back to Dr. Jesse to provide the closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. It was really well presented. I'll open up for the questions now. And see, I just got one here. A question is, what level of census data can we handle? This is a good question. I need to inform that for those that are not familiar, we do the risk assessment with the population, and we need to know with the census information, what is the income level, what is the race, ethnicity, etc. And we do that. And we can do that at a very tight level. We can do at census block. And this is when we have communities, the census block is commonly used. We can also handle larger analysis over census tract. So, see, the next question is, how many toxics can the system handle? The system can handle thousands and thousands of chemicals. I know that in California there are over 1,200 as an example. We easily handle that. It's not a problem. And we address all of that. For you to understand why this 1,200 roads, a car, a truck, a diesel engine, a gasoline engine, we will emit around 1,200 air toxics. And you don't not have monitoring devices on every car. You don't have monitoring to measure all the chemicals. So we know how to handle that. So the next question I got here is, can we change the emissions factor? Yes. Let me provide a longer explanation. If you did stack testing, or if you did some analysis and you have your own emissions factors, you can change that. The system, when you get in, it's a web-based system. You can have 20, 30, 40, 50 people using at the same time. And as you enter, and if you have authorization to make changes, not everybody will see everything. You can control what they see. Some people can only see the AQI, for example. Some people can see everything. Some people can see but not change. Some people can see and change. And those that can change, we track every change that is made. So if you change the emissions factor, emissions factors, then it will trace back. Because later on, if you want to model before, when the emissions factor is different, you can do that because it's in the system. I got another one here, this one through the chat. The model, let me go here. It asks, can the software import socioeconomic demographic data layers? Yes, absolutely, and we do that, absolutely. Would the software be able to generate all the input file for smoke or CMAC? Absolutely, absolutely. It is, the software does that, and it grids it and pass and can be CMAC or ChemX or WRF-Chem. And the next one is wonder if integrated mode such as CMAC has been in the software without needing running CMAC outside the software. Yeah, it's integrated. Let's say you need to run it every day, so it will run it for you automatically every day. And it can be integrated such that you're not running outside, bringing results. It runs inside. It's the same CMAC, no changes. It runs, it reads the results, plots, and present what you need. I got another one not through the chat. What is the preferred photochemical model for AQMIS? We don't have a preferred one. It is what the client wants or the regulatory agency mandates. It is whatever it needs to be. We do have a small preference for WRF-Chem just because we work together with Ravan Armadov, is one of the developers of WRF-Chem, and it integrates the photochemistry with the weather. It's coupled. CMAC and ChemX, excellent models. I'm not saying anything bad about the model. They're excellent. But they assume that if I run WRF, then I pass that to CMAC, there will be no changes, cloud formation or otherwise. But certain cases, that happens. So WRF-Chem is coupled the wind field and the meteorological parameters, cloud formation, etc., with the photochemistry. I didn't receive any other questions, so usually I get the question, which is, where do I get more information? And you can get more information here at Web Lakes AQMIS. You can email aqmis@weblakes.com, or you can call Mr. Brian Matthews. Is right on our Texas office, and it is here's the phone. So I would like to thank all of you for attending this presentation, and I wish that we can have an opportunity to meet anytime soon. Thank you very much.